Labs. I'm with Dave Richardson, and I am Steve Farnsworth. Hey, Dave, how you doing?
Very well, Steve. How are you?
Doing great. So today, Dave and I are actually talking about how B2B can build a strong brand using storytelling. And so we're going to get in. Dave, what do you mean by storytelling for B2B?
What do I mean by storytelling B2B? Honestly, if you take a 30,000 foot elevation and look down on this, I'm not really sure whether B2B or B2C are too different. In this instance, it's one party that is engaging with another party over here, and they're trying to tell them a story. They're trying to guide them through a process. They're trying to engage with them. They're trying to create compelling information that is going to bring them in and allow them to have a conversation. So it's the same when it's B2C. You've got a business over here that's trying to tell a story to a recipient over here, engage them, bring them into the brand, and really use storytelling as it's always been. Whether it's in the business environment, whether it's in the social environment, you think about, when I think about storytelling, I think about entertainers and those entertained. I think performers and an audience. And in B2B, I think of a company here that is trying to engage another company over here. So that's, the role that storytelling takes. When I also think about storytelling and I think about my own career, I started out in the marketing environment. I did a marketing degree, asked my course director, what am I going to do with this marketing degree? If you really want to understand marketing, go and learn how to sell something. And so I went down and I started selling advertising space. Well, in advertising, you're telling a story. It's a business over here telling a story to another business over here, trying to entice them, trying to bring them in, trying to engage them in a business process. So after doing the sales side of things in the publishing house, I actually moved up through the ranks. I launched our first web presence. And again, it's all about a story. You're trying to develop a story for an audience, and you're trying to engage with that audience and bring them in. And then I was trying to round out my communication skills, so I packed up my bags, left London, and came over to California. And
Which is when I first met you.
That's right, yeah. And my boss at the time told me, that would be you again, Steve, told me you've got to be able to tell a story. What is the story that you're trying to sell? And so, throughout my career, whether it's marketing, whether it's sales, whether it's management, and internal communications as well, you have to tell things in stories because you have to engage. And I think that's something that we've learned throughout time, not just in business.
When you maybe actually dive down a little bit, when you talk about storytelling, that's kind of the larger thing, but you talked about some of the specifics. What are some of the deliverables or the digital assets that would come? So you think about storytelling when it shows up digitally in the world. What kinds of formats or places is that going to show up or be reflected in?
Well, so I've talked to you about this many times. I talk about endgame marketing and destination marketing. How it shows up is not important in the initial instance. It's what we're trying to achieve. And if you can pull together an end game, get it down in black and white, and then you start to think about it from a strategic standpoint, then you can start thinking about tools that are actually going to get you to your end game. I think nowadays the desire just to communicate and get out there and start throwing things out there, you see a lot of irrelevant information down to the channel on a regular basis. Something that we're doing now for clients, and you've seen it a lot in the last 12 months, from an asset perspective, once it's fitting into an end game, infographics as an example. And so you see storytelling going down the page from a digital perspective and people telling those stories.
If it's done right.
If it's done right. But I think the problem is that once you start saying, and you're reading about infographics over the last 12 months, there's so many experts on infographics that people just go, oh, I'll do an infographic for that. So it might not necessarily be telling a story or the story it should be telling, but people think that they're telling a story because, oh, I'm doing infographics now, so I'll just throw some information out there into the marketplace. But that's when it doesn't tie back into an end game, and that's where I think we're losing it a little bit. We're just throwing information into the channel and hoping some of it sticks, rather than actually sitting down and going, okay, if I'm going to do an infographic, what am I gonna get out of it? That's the first step. What's the end game? Who am I communicating with? And what is the brand that I am hoping to communicate? And sit down, get those three in order, and then go, okay, well, I'll tell this story, unravel this story, which would be part of your strategy, and then you can create something that's going to be engaging, that's going to be compelling, and that people are going to want to read and potentially share.
Right, and so if you have those, if you're clear about what you're trying to achieve in those areas, and the final, Andrew, you're saying is like it might be an infographic, but you might be telling a story in a news release, or you might be telling a story in a blog post. That each of those items, and there could be like 5 or 10 or 20 throughout the year of each of those that tell part of that narrative, that brand narrative. That's what you're saying. Is that right?
Yeah, and so an infographics just one thing, right? I mean, okay, websites. Let's talk about your digital home. For a long time, it's just a piece of collateral that's been digitized, right? Okay, oh yeah, we do this, we do this, we do this, we do this. Well, it's a living and breathing thing, so why not use it as a living and breathing thing and use it as a platform to engage and tell your story, not just kind of the makeup of this is who we are, this is our vision, this is our mission, or whatever it might be from a brand perspective. I like to simplify that back to kind of a vision / value proposition, have one anchor for the company. But let's start that narrative. Let's start putting pieces of the story together and putting it out in a digital home that's engaging and telling the compelling story, rather than just using it, here's my portfolio, or here's who I am. And just treat it as a living avenue where you can tell your story on a daily basis.
What do you think, looking forward, like, so as communicators, what are the skills that communicators are going to have to be good storytellers?
The same skills as you need to work in business. You need to understand your audience. You need to understand the people that you're trying to communicate with. You need to understand what turns them on, what turns them off. You need to understand how they engage, what kind of media they engage with, and so on and so forth. You need to be able to ask the right questions, and you also need to be able to listen. So if you're going in and sell as a communicator, you're going in and you're interviewing a CEO for a blog piece that you might be writing. You need to be able to ask the right questions, and then you may need to be able to shut up and listen. And we've been working with the editorial community a lot, and they all have opinions, and they all get involved, Steve, and they all talk as much as they listen. But I think the ability to be a good storyteller, and this is where kind of communications and media is merging together. You see a lot of agencies hiring the people from the editorial community because they know how to write, and they know how to engage, and they know how to tell stories. Well, if you can add the marketing element to their ability to write, I think you've got a pretty good melting pot when it comes to storytelling.
So
as it relates to the brand. But
I was going to say is like, so when you're looking at so one of the things that people sometimes have a hard time getting their head around is so how do I tell a story about, especially B2B, lifestyle products tend to have tends to be easier opportunities to do storytelling, or that's about the perception. But if you're looking at a B2B or a deep tech company, and you're going, well, how do I storytell around this chip or this solar app or this thing? What are the elements I'm going to look for? They're going to make up a good story. What are the elements that I want to start thinking about that's going to they're going to be interesting parts of a good story?
So we've been in the tech business for a long time, and as you are well aware as a communicator yourself, Steve, that you're working with a lot of engineers, and what do engineers love? Oh, feature, 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 and that's how they communicate. They actually communicate to themselves, right? They go, oh, this is great, and this is great, and this is great, and they think of all the things that they think are great about their own product, and then they write something down, and so they turn themselves on with whatever they're putting out into the marketplace. One of the things that we do here at Impress Labs is we try and remove them from that environment, and we actually try and take them. You talk about B2B. We take them a step further, and we say, okay, B2B. Let's understand the other part, the B, the people that we're actually trying to communicate. Let's understand them. But let's look at where they're selling their product. And if they're still in the B2B environment, let's look at how they are communicating to their customers. And then if you go into the B2C environment, let's look at how that company is communicating to its customers. And those customers, normally the way that they sell, the lifestyle, as you say, they look at the benefits. What is the benefit? And so ultimately, if you can look at these different conversations and you can take yourself out of your own environment and you can put yourself in the consumer environment and the benefits that you're trying to sell into the consumer environment, you remove yourself from yourself and you start talking in a bigger picture, and you start talking about, okay, my customer is trying to sell to the consumer, and here's how they're selling to the consumer. How am I going to help them sell to the consumer? And that, is a pretty powerful thing, because then you start talking their language and they start to see, they can help me with my sales. They can help me in this process. So understanding every single conversation along the supply chain, I think, is critical in this instance.
Well, so let's actually just kind of wrap this up. Let's say that I've looked at those elements, I'm thinking about it, but now I want to actually go out and start gathering some information for that storytelling. Where do I start to, like, who should I talk to? What process should I follow to start gathering kind of real world information from people and real world stories and those benefits? Where do I start if I want to start putting together that storytelling?
Okay, so if I'm well, the internet's a wonderful thing, Steve, right? I mean, you can find everything and anything on the internet. So your basic research happens right there. But also, you've got a little bit of knowledge because you've been working in this marketplace for quite some time. So if I'm a chip guy and I'm selling into the handset market, I start to look at what is. And understand that the carriers are the ones with the real power here, right? So look at how handset manufacturers are talking to the carriers. Okay, so let's not use Apple because they are also pretty powerful. But think about HTC and how they sell into the carriers. So how does HTC express itself? And then look at, okay, so AT&T. How does AT&T sell its HTC allocation? How does it market that to the marketplace? So you'd go into stores. You start looking at stores. How do they do it? How are they positioned? You'd look at advertising. Again, YouTube. You can find any ad that you want. Just go on YouTube, plug it in, and you see how the carriers are projecting to or expressing to the consumer. And then you start documenting, okay, this is how it gets done in this part of the chain. This is how it gets done in this part of the chain. And you start to formulate, okay, how can I fit into this? Leverage some of the stuff that they're doing over here and bring it into my story so people can fully understand that me as a chip guy who is doing envelope tracking and allows power management aspects in the phone, gives the phone longer battery life that they're then selling into the carriers. So that's, so you've got to understand the dynamics of each part of the communication channel, and then you start applying, okay, where do I fit in? How can I heighten my value? How can I express that? How can I get the handset manufacturers to understand why I actually have a play within the carrier-consumer relationship. So that's how I would start the process, and then work back,
Right.
figure out how I can come across as being a critical part in the success factor of the handset manufacturer. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks very much, Dave. This has been the B2B Marketing Minute, which lasts more than a minute, with Dave Richardson from Impress Labs and Steve Farnsworth. Thank you, everybody.
Cheers. Bye.